A common concern folks have when they start working with Tailwind is the sheer amount of classes it puts in your HTML. Long series of classes like this one here, or maybe our headline down there, are raising some concerns about maintainability and how you would go about reusing this same element in multiple places in your project with all these classes. So let's take the most extreme example in this page, which is our button here. And we're going to use this to take a look at Tailwind's apply feature, which lets you abstract a CSS component class. This sounds like a good candidate to demonstrate the apply feature because we easily have 20 classes here. And also a button is something you can imagine yourself reusing over and over in a project. So let me grab every class name in here and I will cut that and replace this with a class that we'll call button btn. So when I save, all will be broken. But now let's head over to our CSS file. And in here, I'll create this button class. Now, for now, bear with me for a second. I will move this before the utilities layer and I'll explain to you why in a second. In here, instead of defining key value pairs, I will use the @apply directive and simply paste all the utilities that I've copied over. So what this apply feature will do here is take all these utility classes that we've applied together, compose them, and then generate a button class, btn class, with all the styles combined together. So if we look at the generated CSS, you can see that we have a btn class and it's applied border radius, display inline block, the font weight, font size, line height, focus states, and all the utilities that we've applied together. You can also see that our button looks nice again and the hover state, focus state, active state, everything works. Now, why did I put this button class here and not after the Tailwind utilities? Well, we want to be able to override our button class with utilities on a per case basis. For example, let's say that somewhere where we're using our button class component that we've just created, we want to add more padding horizontal. So let's add here px10. And you can see the extra spacing here on the left and the right. Now, if I had my button defined after the Tailwind utilities layer, let's try that. You can see that now we have lost the padding on the left and the right. The reason is that the px10 class that we're using here has been defined in the Tailwind utilities layer. And then later down the CSS file, we define a px5 class, which will override the px10 because it comes after in the cascade. To make things easier for you, and so you don't have to remember where to write your CSS in the file, you can use another Tailwind directive @layer. The @layer directive lets you specify which of the 3 Tailwind layers you want to write CSS for. So here, for example, I want to write for the components layer, and I can open a block here and move my button declaration inside of that block. As soon as I've done that, you can see that the padding is back here on the sides. And wrapping a button inside the @layer components directive here makes sure it will be generated in the right place in the style sheet, which is right at the end of the components layer before the utilities. So hey, that's pretty cool. We've cleaned up our HTML, we've created a nice component class for the button, and at this point you might think about going and replacing everything in your HTML and abstracting component classes for everything. Now, before you go and do that, I want to challenge you to think about the trade-offs that you're making here. Specifically, you should think about the fact that you're now moving the complexity and maintainability somewhere else. I'll try now to make a little example that illustrates that. So let's get rid of our px10 class here. And I'm going to duplicate this button, and the second button is going to say, learn more. And let's quickly add a space between utility here with space X, and I think 1 is going to be fine. So now we have 2 buttons, and usually when you have 2 buttons like this, you have a different hierarchy. There's a primary button and then a secondary action that you probably want to look a little bit different. So let's try to build this. We have a button primary and a button secondary. So it's all going to be broken now, but let's go and fix it. So here I'll change the class from btn to btn primary, which should fix our first button, right? And then I'll, for now, duplicate all of this and call that button secondary. So for this one, we'll change some of the styles. We can keep this, but the background will be, let's say, gray 300 by default. On hover, it will be a little bit lighter, so background gray 200. This remains the same. The ring is also gray 300. And finally, the active state will be BG gray 400. So let me save that. Oh, and one more thing. We don't want the text white here. We want the text to be, let's go with text gray 800. So we have our 2 buttons, and they do work. But I can see a couple of problems already coming up here. The first thing is I don't like this shadow here on the light gray background. It looks a bit blurry. So I really technically just want the shadow on the primary button and have the second one flat. This tells me we've probably abstracted too much away in our button and baked a few too many design opinions in it. What I really should do is remove the shadow class here for both the buttons. Let me quickly copy it and delete it. And then we're going to manually add it to our button primary here. Right, so now we have the shadow button for the primary and the secondary is flat. Similarly, because this is the secondary button and not the primary action, we likely don't want the attention-grabbing hover lift-off effects that we've got with the translate here. So once again, we want the first button, the primary one, to have this hover effect, and the other one should be just flat and change background color without moving. So one more time, I'm going to find the class to remove. Here it's hover translate y 0.5. I'll copy that and I'll remove it in both buttons, but I will also remove the transform and transition classes here. Now, once again, let's go in our primary button and add the hover effect. And we will also add the transform and transition classes. Okay, so now we have a nice primary button with a nice lift-off effect and a shadow, where the secondary button is a little bit more subtle. Perfect. The next fairly obvious problem is we now have a lot of duplication in our CSS. It's quite clear that both buttons share a lot of common styles, so why don't we abstract a core button component that has all the styles shared by both, and then create modifiers for the primary and secondary buttons. So up here, I'll bring back the .btn class. So in there, we're going to grab everything that's common to both buttons. So I want the inline block, the padding, and the rounded corners. So I'll grab these three, and here I will add, apply, and paste these. We don't want the background color, the hover background color, but we do want the focus outline none, focus ring, and ring offset. So I'll add these here. I do not want the ring color or opacity or active state or the text color, but I want everything after that. So uppercase, tracking wide, font weight, font size. So let me also paste these right there. And now, well, I need to go and remove whatever's been used and abstracted to the common button from both. So for both buttons, I will remove everything up to here. I will keep the colors, but remove the outline and ring offset. Then I want to keep all of these, which are colors, and basically want to remove everything after the text color, so from uppercase to text base for both these two buttons. So we should be good now. We've broken slightly our button once again because they're missing the btn class that has the common styles. For both my buttons here, I will add the btn class. Let's take a look. It all works. Very nice. So that's starting to look solid. We have no duplication in our HTML. We have no duplication in our CSS because we've abstracted the common classes to a btn class. But even in this situation, I can think of at least 3 subtle problems that could arise over time. The first one, readability. Now, I know this might sound strange because for Tailwind newcomers, seeing a bunch of classes like this sounds more like clutter than useful information. But if you take them one by one and look at them, you actually get all the information that you need to know what the UI will look like. We have a margin top of level 6. The font size is 2XL. The weight is bold. The color is gray 900. And then on a small breakpoint, we increase the margin top to 8. We change the font size to 4XL. On the large breakpoint, we change it to 3XL, etc. There's a lot of useful declarative information here. Pretty sure that if you say work on another project for 3 months and come back to this one, you'll immediately know what's happening here in this heading. If in 3 months you context switch back to this project, there's a big chance that you'll need to go hunt in another file to understand what btn and btn primary do. One of the main productivity gains of the Tailwind workflow is you never leave your HTML file. I guarantee you that after working like this for a while, anything that makes you go away from your HTML file to do something will feel like friction. Finally, every time you abstract a CSS component class with apply, you generate more CSS for your output file. You get the sense of removing duplication from your HTML, but this duplication actually manifests itself back in the CSS file. So the bottom line is the apply feature is here for people to use it. I'm not saying you should never use it, but I also recommend to not go overboard with it. A good recommendation or rule to follow when using apply is to stick to a single HTML element, something like a button, a headline, or a form input. Whenever you find yourself trying to abstract bigger components, like a card component with an image, a heading, some text, there's likely a better way to handle this. This is exactly what we're going to look at in the next video.